Hello, welcome to my channel. I am Paul, and in this video I wanted to talk a bit about consoles and what they mean in our digital workflow and digital world of making music. For myself, I came from never having a console or never even having something other than my interface that I was like recording through, because I just had like an M Audio 2-track, and that was like my first experiences with recording music. So moving to a console workflow was life changing in a bunch of different ways. Talking I never went to audio school, but I have a bunch of people that I know went to audio school, and from what I know, a lot of their training is around consoles and, using like a console workflow at a low scale and being able to understand like what everything does and how to use it properly. Most of the consoles I've used are like smaller home studio style consoles that reflect what a larger console is, but are way less complicated and kind of more feature rich for what a console's purpose is, I think, in the modern times. There's like the giant SSL consoles and giant API consoles that a lot of big studios have, and I think part of having a console in your home or in your like smaller studio is to reflect that workflow, whether you have one of those digital consoles that is lining up with all of your faders in the DAW and you can actually like mix your track in real life with the faders, or whether you have an outboard console where you're going all of the outputs out of your interface and then into console and then back into the interface. In this video, I'm going to be specifically talking about consoles in the home environment and in smaller studio spaces, and how they can fit into a digital workflow, or why they're even valuable, slash what you'll learn from having that kind of interface in your studio. The same thing can be achieved by like lower quality mixing boards, like little Mackie boards or Allen and Heath boards, and some of these boards have their own sound and usefulness inside of a studio space, but they can also not be useful. And establishing what you're getting from your console and why you're using it is a really important part of buying one, choosing which one you want, and how it fits into your workflow. So I'm going to touch on those things a little bit in this video too, as I'm going to be comparing like the two main consoles that I use. So one of the first things that I learned and really found valuable from my console is using preamps and being able to understand the headroom and saturation involved in using your preamps that are outside of your interface. When you come from learning just from an interface and like you're just used to plugging a mic directly into an interface or an instrument directly into an interface, you don't think about preamps in the same way, because you essentially just have one knob that is like leveling your sound, where when you have a console, your preamp is getting fed into other parts of the chain. Like you can see with the Tascam, the master faders are currently down. But your preamp is the tool that you're going to use that's going to help you create more color and saturation. So on the Tascam, the red knobs at the top are the preamps, and the more you drive this, the more the audio that's going in will get that preamp color, and then you can use the fader and the master faders to control the levels so you aren't like blowing out either the tape or blowing out your digital audio workstation. So Preamps. I have the SSL6 and the Tascam, and the Tascam has these really loud, rich, and colorful preamps when you blow them out, and when you record directly into them too, and when you pass audio from the DAW back into them. That has its own sound as well. So I really like that for color, and that's one of the reasons that I got the consoles, to use the preamps as like an option for recording and for mixdowns. And the SSL preamps are known to be really transparent and more of like a pure kind of sound. But I did always notice that I liked using my SSL preamps much more than my onboard interface preamps, of course. Well, maybe not of course, but definitely a lot of testing back and forth. And for a long time I had an Apollo and was testing the different Apollo preamps versus the SSL. And on some sources, having the Apollo preamps was very useful, but having the SSL as like a way to create a cohesive sound is a cool option inside of recording music, because you can, even if you just have a 2-input interface, you can plug the SSL into that and then record like an entire session in Logic or Ableton and have all of the sources have that transparent SSL sound, and you can use the onboard compression and EQ to help shape things a little bit and do like a minor mix before you use any plugins at all in the session. And I've always preferred that workflow versus like having tracks that have a bunch of plugins already preset and you're listening to them when you're recording, or spending time after recording to mix down using plugins like inside of the DAW. This helps cut some time. This helps when you're listening, you can just hear the SSL preamp and the EQ and compression like work in your voice, versus when you plug straight into the interface, you're just hearing like the sound of just that preamp. So comparatively, way more feeling and emotion, I feel like, when you record using the SSL and even the Tascam too. I feel like when I have my guitar and voice and I'm recording a track, I feel like there is a lot more like emotion that I can hear through the recording, and it helps me perform better. And those are things that are really useful inside of recording, performing, producing, all of these things. So preamps, consoles, useful. The next thing to talk about is Headroom and Faders. When you come from a digital world and you're used to mixing in the DAW all the time, it can be really useful to have something physical to touch and meters that you can like read and understand. And with the SSL specifically, when I'm doing mixdowns in there or I'm using it for mastering, sometimes you want a little bit of that board saturation or just like that clipping, because it does sound good. And definitely listening for it and then like pushing your master fader up so that you're hearing the saturation kind of ring out more. Those are part of the console workflow that are much harder to do in the DAW. To get that clipping texture, you pretty much have to use like a plugin and like push the input knob and the output knob down, which then you get whatever like saturation or color that plugin's trying to get you, i.e. like the Abbey Road vinyl type plugins, which I do like those plugins. Those are quite good for mastering or adding color. But when it comes to just having like a physical thing where you can like see how the meters are acting, and you have like a master fader where you can like just barely kiss the distortion as much as you want, or push it to as loud as you can tolerate. Those are really useful parts of understanding Headroom and understanding in your DAW how you can even make your headroom a lot better. I work with a bunch of different producers of like rap, trap, hip hop music, and a lot of times they are trying to learn how to make their headroom better so that their song sounds better. And having a console will teach you that pretty quickly over like the span of a couple months. If you just practice recording through it, practice doing mixdowns through it, you'll get an idea for like where things should properly sit, because then you can see like this master fader like responding. Kind of a hard thing to potentially justify to people, especially when you can just like, in the digital workflow, there's a lot of compensation, and like people use a lot of limiting or compression on their masters to balance out problems with headroom. But understanding how to create proper headroom in your tracks is really the best way to make better sounding tracks, and especially when it gets like the mastering phase and just higher level people working on your mixing and mastering parts of your music. So kind of the last part of this video I wanted to touch on is the toolkit you get through a console and what it teaches you about mixing and what it maybe allows you to use less of. I talked a little bit about this in the first section with the EQs and compression. Those are part of the toolkit, which help you skip doing that stuff in the DAW, which can save a bunch of time and processing on your computer, which is like really essential nowadays. So with the Tascam, there's routing where it has an A output and a B output, so that can be really useful for doing management of your system, or like running it out to multiple things, like running it out to the DAW. It has an A and B output, and then it also has outputs for each of the preamps, which is how I run it to my DAW. I use the outputs directly from the preamps, and then there's outputs from the tape itself. So you get a lot of options with routing, and that